Some people hold grudges. Jim Cornette takes that idea, beats it with a tennis racket, sets it on fire, and mails the ashes to his enemies with tracking. And if there's one man he's held that eternal, festering, biblical-level hatred for, it's Vince freaking Russo, the guy Cornette blames for killing wrestling. The guy Cornette once said he'd pay bail for after committing a felony. This isn't a feud. This is the wrestling version of Kill Bill, only Cornette's got the whole list and Russo is circled in red ink. It all started in the WWF, mid to late 90s. Russo, this New York shock jock writer with zero wrestling background, is suddenly being treated like Shakespeare in a fanny pack. Meanwhile, Cornette, a Southern traditionalist who worships the wrestling business like it's the Bible and his mother, is forced to coexist with a guy who thought beaver cleavage, pole matches, and Mae Young giving birth to a hand were solid ideas. Cornette: I'd rather watch a monkey hump a football than one more of Vince Russo's shit shows. Russo thought wrestling needed more soap opera and less logic. Cornette wanted holds, psychology, and blood that meant something. They butted heads constantly in WWF's creative meetings. Russo pitching adult diaper matches, Cornette trying not to have a brain aneurysm. Russo: I wanted to push the envelope. Cornette: He didn't push the envelope. He took a dump in it and mailed it to the fans. Russo came from the world of magazines and radio, no in-ring experience, didn't study psychology, didn't understand heat, didn't care. He was writing for people who'd never seen a headlock and thought goldfish memory was a compliment. Cornette spat. A guy who thought booking meant throwing spaghetti at the wall, and if it stuck, cool. If it didn't, put it on a pole match. The Attitude Era was heating up. Vince McMahon, desperate to beat WCW, gave Russo the wheel, and Cornette the ulcer. Cornette remembers WWF creative meetings where Russo would pitch garbage like matches where women stripped to win titles, grown men feuding over custody papers, and his personal Vietnam, the creation of beaver cleavage, a gimmick that somehow combined Oedipus, incest, and Leave It to Beaver in one greasy bowl of TV failure. And if that wasn't enough, Russo later graduated to full-blown war crimes in WCW, most infamously booking Judy Bagwell on a forklift, where Buff Bagwell's real-life mom was hoisted into the air like a clearance flat screen at Walmart while Buff wrestled Chris Kanyon. Cornette wasn't even in WCW at that point, but when he saw it, he aged 6 years and blamed Russo anyway. This guy turned wrestling into a clown orgy with a forklift budget. Cornette, red in the face, Tennessee rage boiling over, would try to explain how wrestling needed structure, not sex gags and car crash stunts every 90 seconds. Russo would look at him like he was speaking Morse code with a pork chop. I'd explain a heel turn like it was Shakespeare, and he'd say, yeah, but what if she gets pregnant with a midget's baby and it explodes? It wasn't just creative differences, it was creative Armageddon. Russo didn't just disagree with Cornette, he actively rejected everything Cornette stood for. Cornette believed wrestling should build. Russo booked like every fan had ADHD and a monster truck rally to get to in 10 minutes. Every match was a swerve. Every promo had an F-bomb. And logic? Russo hadn't seen that since elementary school math. Vince Russo was the guy who'd fire a gun in the middle of a symphony and call it innovation. So, yeah, Cornette didn't just dislike Russo's ideas. He saw him as wrestling's Ebola virus, infecting a business that once drew 20,000 people to see two guys lock up. Now it was drawn-out skits with hand puppets, sex jokes, and guys getting beat up by 9-year-olds with sock puppets. And the worst part? McMahon let it happen. Russo was empowered, promoted, given airtime. To Cornette, that wasn't a win. That was wrestling's funeral. And Vince Russo? He was the priest, the gravedigger, and the drunk who danced on the coffin. Cornette wasn't just disgusted. He felt betrayed. He had spent 30 years treating wrestling like a religion. Russo was now using it to stage dick jokes and call it art. He turned wrestling into trash TV with a budget. You could get more psychology from a dog show. In 1999, Russo left WWF for WCW. Cornette didn't throw a party, but he didn't deny that he danced a little. He was WCW's problem now, until they called me a few months later and asked if I'd come fix it. I said, "Did you call the fire department too? Because this place is already in ashes." From that moment on, the hate was forever. When Jim Cornette and Vince Russo ended up in TNA around 2006, it was less a reunion and more a wrestling hostage situation. Both men had been separated by years of backstage death stares and podcast eviscerations, and now they were forced to coexist under the same roof. But Cornette made one thing crystal clear from day one. If Russo walks into my aisle, somebody's getting a trip to the ER. It ain't gonna be me. TNA tried to keep them apart, like two angry toddlers on opposite sides of the sandbox. Russo was doing his usual creative voodoo, pushing shock angles that made Cornette's blood pressure spike faster than a shoot interview with Bubba Ray. Cornette, the old-school play-by-the-rules or get-your-ass-out guy, was constantly butting heads with Russo's let's make a soap opera starring zombies, ninjas, and a rusty trombone booking style. The tension leaked out into podcasts, shoot interviews, and online shoot videos, where Cornette tore into Russo with a fury that could melt steel. He called Russo every name in the book, including the classic, "He's like a child playing with matches in a fireworks factory. One day he's going to burn this whole place down." Meanwhile, Russo stayed cool, often dismissing Cornette as a bitter old relic who didn't understand modern wrestling. The two men never exchanged a word face-to-face, but waged war through public insults and backstage politics. This feud was so bad it almost literally took down TNA. Some insiders say the creative turmoil during this period was a big factor in the company's eventual collapse. It was the slow-motion train wreck that no one could turn away from, because it was a battle between wrestling's past and its unhinged, ridiculous future. By the 2010s, this feud had mutated from wrestling war to true crime podcast material. Cornette didn't just rant anymore, he wanted Russo gone from the business. From Earth, if possible. It started with podcasts. Cornette's mic became his machine gun. Every show featured at least one Russo drive-by. He's a disease. Wrestling would be better if he was in the ground. Eventually, Russo fired back. Not with words, but with the police. In 2010, after Cornette publicly wrote a death threat email saying he wanted to track Russo down and kill him, Russo contacted authorities. Yes, an actual police report, filed over pro wrestling creative beef. "I'm worried for my safety," Russo said. Cornette: "Good." At this point, they weren't just enemies. They were living exhibits in a criminal trial waiting to happen. Cornette once said if Russo walked into the room at a convention, he wouldn't even hesitate. "I would walk across the room and beat the piss out of him in front of God and everybody." Russo later claimed on YouTube that he forgave Cornette because of God. Cornette responded by mocking his religion, saying God must have been drunk when he made Russo. It's now been over 20 years, and they still haven't spoken. Not on a call, not at a funeral, not even through a court mediator. Cornette's summary? The day Vince Russo dies, I'm not sending flowers, I'm sending confetti. This wasn't a wrestling feud. It was Shakespeare with a folding chair. A slow, savage unraveling of two men who never belonged in the same room, let alone the same industry. Cornette saw wrestling as sacred. Russo saw it as shock TV with ring ropes. And in between them stood a generation of fans. Some laughing, some crying, all watching one of the most legit shoot rivalries in wrestling history. If wrestling had a Mount Rushmore of hate, Cornette vs. Russo would be the whole damn mountain. If you made it this far without throwing a tennis racket at your screen, you're exactly the kind of savage wrestling fan we need. Hit like, smash subscribe, and drop a comment on who you want Cornette to fight next. Verbally, legally, or in a dream deathmatch. We've got more heat, more history, and more beef than catering at Starrcade. Wrestling was never fake, but this feud was never a work. Thanks for watching.